Star Trek Academy Collision Course. Chapter 17. How can you and your brother live like this? For one thing, Dad, it's cheap. For another, if you look around, we're not in Iowa anymore. Kirk opened the cooler door and wondered why. Of course there was nothing edible. He'd been gone for a few days, and he was a shopper. His father's tall figure blocked most of one window. Joe Kirk was staring out at the equally old and decrepit apartment building across the street. "That's not you, Jimmy. That's George talking." Kirk took a deep breath to calm himself. "Come on, Dad. His name is Sam." "I know what your brother's name is. I gave it to him." "And he doesn't want it. You're George Joseph Kirk. He wants to be his own man." "Men don't run away from their obligations." Almost of its own accord, Kirk's hand slammed shut the cooler door, nearly rocking the old appliance off its base. He turned to face Joe Kirk, angry with his father, but angrier with the heaviness of the tracking module fastened around his right wrist. "Let him go, Dad. He has no obligations. None that have anything to do with you." "The farm!" Joe Kirk turned from the window, his bulk now silhouetted against the dirty panes. He was a big man, 55, still strong, still powerful. He kept his hair in a crew cut, and 2 years out of Starfleet he still wore his service sideburns with laser-sharp points. Kirk's eyes locked on his father's. "It's your farm," he said carefully, for what felt like the 100th time. "Yours and Mom's. Not Sam's, not mine." "Ah, Jimmy." Kirk's father spread his enormous hands as if they no longer had the strength to do anything. "Why are we like this?" There were so many answers Kirk wanted to give his father, but he finally settled on the one that made the most sense to him and Sam. Something he'd never had the courage to say before, so simply. "Because you keep trying to run our lives." His father's shock looked genuine. "You're 17. You're not old enough to know how to run your life." "Who says? I'm doing fine." "Jimmy, you just got arrested by Starfleet for vehicle theft. Do you know how that reflects on me? On your mother?" Kirk struggled to control himself. "Will you listen to yourself? Somehow, what Starfleet thinks I did, something they can't prove, by the way, reflects on you and Mom. Dad, you've got to stop this." Sudden silence made the cramped and dismal room seem even smaller. Kirk could hear his father working hard to keep his voice down. "I know you didn't steal anything. You're not that kind of kid." "Thank you," Kirk said flatly, "but I'm not a kid anymore." Joe pressed his lips together, shook his head as if he were counting to 10. "Okay, whatever you say, a young man, whatever you want. But I know that if a Starfleet car's been stolen, and somehow your brother George, Sam, is behind it." "You don't know that." "Let me finish," Joe said sharply. "I know you don't agree, but give me some credit for understanding my boys. Your brother has always looked for the easy way, and it's always been in your nature to take care of him. Your mother says you'd take care of everybody if you could." "Sam doesn't need my help." Joe regarded his younger son with pity. "Is there food in the cooler? I don't even have to look to confirm that, because you've been in custody all night, and Sam probably doesn't even know where to find the market. We both know he's got better things to do with whatever money he gets, however he gets it." The argument was too old, familiar, and wouldn't be settled soon. "Look, Dad, I'm tired. I'm going to bed." Kirk headed toward the door to the apartment's single bedroom. His father reached out to catch his son's arm. "We need to talk." "In the morning." "At least call your mother to explain." Kirk pulled away from Joe. Why don't you do that? You seem to know it all. He threw the door shut behind him. The cramped bedroom was gloomy and little bigger than the narrow cot that ran along one pockmarked wall. Kirk collapsed on it, his entire body trembling in the aftermath of all that had happened, his mind all the while searching to understand why he had behaved the way he had, afraid to find the answer. What if that answer dragged him back to the killing ground of Tarsus 4, to the screams from those the hunters found, to the certainty of death, not just for him, but for the children who looked up to him, who trusted him to save them all? Even as he closed his eyes, he sensed his father's solid presence outside the door. He knew his father's code would prevent him from entering, not even to reassure his son. A part of Kirk wished desperately that just this once his father would break his rule, do exactly that, and as if he was small again and lost in the fields of corn, his father would gather him up into his arms and tell him that everything was all right and that everything would always be all right. Kirk opened his eyes and stared up at the ceiling, dry-eyed. He wasn't a child anymore. He was a man, and nothing would ever be all right, ever, because no matter how much he did, it would never be enough for anyone or for himself. The paragon of virtue was nicked? Griffin's explosive laughter rattled the metal walls of his den-like office. It was a claustrophobic, mean room with a low overhead, sited 8 meters above the deck of the Pacific Rome's main cargo hold. Through its narrow, outward slanting windows, Griffin could look down over his burgeoning enterprise and the underage workers who served it and him. Sam stood nervously in front of the single battered desk. He had tried to play an angle that he thought would free him from Griffin's demand to meet his younger brother. But from Griffin's delighted response, he had failed. Griffin caught his breath, directed his attention to the young woman gracefully arranged in a corner of an old sofa, draped with what appeared to be dusty antique tapestries. Her head was bent over a news pad, her legs tucked up under her. Sam knew her as Dalla, Griffin's sometime girlfriend. "You've heard of this kid, right?" Griffin asked her. When she didn't respond, he snagged a thermal cup from his desk and threw it at the wall above her. It twanged off the metal and bounced onto the carpet-covered deck, finally rolling between 2 tall stacks of small shipping containers. Dalla looked up from her pad, unimpressed. She had painted iridescent blue butterfly wings around her eyes, and Sam thought the glistening indigo jumpsuit she wore fit her like a second skin. "I heard you." "Who am I talking about?" "Jimmy Kirk." Dalla rolled her eyes. "It's always Jimmy Kirk with you." Sam frowned, wondering what she meant, but he knew he didn't have the stomach to question Griffin about it or about anything. All he had to think about was how to keep Jimmy out of this. Griffin put his feet back up on his desk roughly, and in the same movement grabbed a small clay object to avoid knocking it over. The squat figurine looked old to Sam, but that was all he thought, because Griffin's strange eyes were on him now. "So, Georgie, what do you think we should do?" Sam mustered all his courage. "Well, if Starfleet thinks Jimmy's involved in stealing cars, then he's probably going to be under surveillance, right? So maybe it'd be better if you weren't seen with him?" "You let me worry about that." Griffin held up the clay figure and squinted at it with a frown. "But here's something you can worry about." "Yeah?" "Your little brother's a regular star cadet. You really think he's going to be able to keep his mouth shut when they start asking him questions?" What kind of questions?" Georgie, he's going to give you up. He won't be able to help himself. They'll ask who stole the car, and he'll tell them." Sam had never thought of that. "But, Griff, they think he stole it, so they won't ask him, and Jimmy won't do anything that'll hurt me. I mean, he wanted to fly the car last night because he knew if I got caught, my probation's over." Griffin swung his feet down, leaned forward, hands cupped around the figurine. "Exactly. They come for you. You're facing a few years of rehabilitation. Maybe send you off to one of those penal colonies where they rewire your brain. Unless, Griffin dragged out the moment, you cut a deal. Sam suddenly grasped what Griffin was implying and began speaking so quickly that his panicked words ran together. Griff, no way. I'd never give you up. No, never, no matter what they offered me. Griffin's grin was unnerving. Guess what? I believe you. Because if you ever did anything that stupid, they'd find you gutted like a Telluride on Andoria. Dallas snickered without looking up from the news. So, Georgie boy, if you don't think Jimmy's going to rat you out, and I know you won't rat me out, why do you think I said you have something to worry about? Sam nervously shook his head. He knew that half of whatever Griffin said to him was just to keep him off balance, but he couldn't conceive of any way to talk back. Jimmy would know, he thought. He can handle creeps like Griffin. Who's missing from the equation? Griffin prompted. Sam stared at him blankly. Griffin counted ostentatiously on the fingers of one hand. Let's see, there was Kirk brother number 1, Kirk brother number 2, and... Alyssa? A name shot out of Sam with geyser force. Griffin smiled approval. Now you're firing on all thrusters. Consider this. She's a Starfleet midshipman, so she's committed to the truth. I could hold a knife to her throat to keep her quiet, and she'd still tell me exactly what happened. Jimmy might not give you up, but his little playmate won't even think twice about it. Hell, she won't even think once. She'll just spill her guts, which brings me back to you and your desire to not have your guts spilled. Dalla laughed softly to herself. Sam could feel the sweat trickle down his forehead. But Griff, she was just along for the ride. Jimmy'll never mention her. Starfleet will never know about her. So let's keep it that way. She's a sweet little ricin' girl. We don't need to bring her into this at all. That means I let you keep your finder's fee. The 1,000C wafer was still in Sam's hand. He had just tried to return it to Griffin, but his offer had been refused. That means, Griffin added, I still expect you to get your brother here so I can fill him in on what's expected of him before he gets it into his head to do the right thing. Somehow, from somewhere, without even weighing the risk of what he was about to do, Sam found the unexpected strength to stand up for his brother. Jimmy's not involved in any of this. I don't want him hurt. Griffin rocked back in his chair, mouth open in mock surprise. I'm impressed. His eyes went cold. But I'm also disappointed. Sam had trouble breathing as Griffin got up, walked around from his desk until he was centimeters from Sam. Your little car theft stunt left a lot of dominoes out there that could start falling any second. Griffin leaned in closer to Sam's face, flicked his fingers to the left and right as he described the consequences of those dominoes falling over. Oops, there's Jimmy blabbing, leading back to you, leading back to me. Oops, there's the girlfriend trying to help Jimmy, leading back to you, leading back to me. You get it, Georgie? All those falling dominoes end up on me. Griffin's last gesture was to flick Sam's nose. Sam flinched, but made no protest. So I want you to ask yourself this question. Will I wait around for that to happen? Or will I destroy those other dominoes before they even fall? I'll get him here, Sam croaked. Griffin patted him on the cheek like a dog. Good boy. When Sam left the Pacific Rome that night, he stood on the pier only long enough to retch up everything in his stomach. He had never felt so frightened or so trapped, and he feared that this time, not even Jimmy could make things right. Spock stood in the center of the main room in his family quarters, calmly, because there was no other way for a Vulcan to stand. His mother was near, her face taut with human worry. His father's image gazed out at him from a wall-mounted view screen. Sarek was on a commercial flight to Titan to meet with a scientific delegation from Naren Prime, a Class P world whose inhabitants felt more at home on that frozen moon than on Earth. "Explain to me why you must return to Starfleet headquarters," Spock's father said. Spock looked down at the tracking module he wore. "I must appear for my hearing." "But you told them that you did not steal the car." "Correct," Spock said. "They did not believe me." Sarek raised an eyebrow by an infinitesimal degree, signifying his great surprise. "But you're Vulcan, Spock. You would not lie in a matter such as that?" "No," Spock agreed. "I would not." Amanda touched her son's arm. "Spock, if the authorities need proof of your innocence, then surely you can provide them with an alibi. Since they know exactly when the car was stolen, all you have to do is tell them where you were when it happened." "Her logic is flawless," Sarek said with Vulcan pride. Spock agreed with a nod. "Where were you?" Sarek asked. Spock kept his attention fixed on his father's image because a perverse part of him, which he assumed was some last vestige of his human heritage he had successfully put aside, wanted to see Sarek's reaction to what his son was about to say. "I was in the Garden of Venus, what humans refer to as a love bar." Sarek nodded sagely. "An establishment for social gathering, in which patrons celebrate and or arrange various permutations of assignations, typically to be explored at other more private locations." "Typically," Spock agreed, noting that his father's statement was word for word the definition from the embassy's briefing papers. "What was the purpose of your presence there?" Amanda interrupted. "Sarek, perhaps that's too personal a question." Sarek looked puzzled, though only his closest family members would have known it. "Spock is not yet ready for his next Ponfar. Therefore, he was not in the love bar for the typical reason. Is that not correct, Spock?" "Indeed it is." "Your purpose, then?" "At the time the car was stolen, I was engaged in selling a pre-Enlightenment Seleth figurine to what is known as a fence, that is, a dealer in stolen goods." Amanda reacted with uncharacteristic shock. "Spock!" Sarek, though, gave no reaction at all. "I see. The figurine was a forgery, of course?" "It was," Spock confirmed. "What?" Amanda looked to the view screen. "How could you know that?" "The only source of such figurines on Earth is a display of cultural artifacts in the Vulcan Embassy's reception hall. The value of such items is incalculable. And Spock would no more steal one than he would a Starfleet car." Amanda shook her head in abject puzzlement. "Then why?" "I am certain Father can explain the rest more succinctly than I," Spock said blandly. He had never spoken to Sarek so confrontationally. "Sarek," Amanda said, making no attempt to hide her confusion. "Over the past 42 days, Spock has come to me with what he believes is evidence that the most valuable items in the reception hall's display cases are being stolen and replaced with forgeries." "And are they?" Amanda asked, still shocked. Sarek said nothing. Spock was not about to let his father continue with his denial of the problem. "Father?" Finally, Sarek must have realized he had been outmaneuvered. "What I tell you now must remain in the strictest confidence." Finally, Spock thought with an embarrassing sense of triumph over his father. He quickly suppressed it. "The embassy staff is aware of the situation," Spock deduced. After a few moments of expectant silence, Amanda said, "That's all?" Sarek reluctantly continued. "For reasons quite logical, which I cannot discuss, the staff does not wish to stop the thefts at this time. That is all I will say on the matter." Amanda's shoulders stiffened, and Spock realized she knew exactly how she felt. "This is an unacceptable answer," Spock said, surprising himself as much as his parents with his rebellious attitude. "It is one thing to know that the embassy staff does not trust me. as if they think I am something other than Vulcan. But when you, my own father, treat me with a similar level of distrust. He then delivered the harshest assessment any Vulcan son can make of his father. I find your behavior toward me unsatisfactory. Amanda was steeped enough in Vulcan ways to put her hand over her mouth in stunned silence. The charged moment became worse as Sarek replied to the outburst, treating his sons harshly in turn. I find your statement disrespectful. Stop it, you two, Amanda said urgently. I will not stand by and have you say such hurtful things to each other. My father has a means to change the impasse he has created. Sarek's eyes narrowed by a millimeter. Your suggestions, Spock? Tell me why you allow illegal activities to occur in this embassy. I cannot. Spock realized he had balled his hands into fists behind his back, and was glad neither of his parents could see this outrageous loss of control. I can only arrive at one logical explanation for your position. Explain. You do not trust me for the same reason the embassy staff do not. You believe me to be less than Vulcan. Amanda stood before Spock and spoke as if in great pain. Spock, that's not true. You know that's not true. Your mother is correct, Sarek said sternly. If my logic is flawed, then correct me, Spock challenged. State another reason. Sarek shook his head once, clearly in emotional distress. I cannot. Vulcans do not accept me as Vulcan. The humans accept me as human. What would you have me be, Father? Spock felt his mother put her arm through his. Our son, whom we love, she looked at the view screen, and trust. Is that true? Spock asked his father, and he was so upset that he no longer cared that his words caught in his throat. Your analysis of the situation is flawed, Sarek replied, as if he were speaking to a child. We will discuss this further when I return. He leaned forward, and the view screen image switched from Sarek to a Vulcan desert scene. Spock, Amanda said, gently withdrawing her arm from his. You know your father didn't mean any of that. Spock relaxed his hands. Unlike me, Sarek is Vulcan. He is incapable of saying anything except what he means. He gave his mother a small half bow. If you will excuse me, Mother, I have my studies. As Spock left Amanda speechless in the now silent room, he thought again of the human, Kirk, and envied him the closeness of his family. When he was alone, he examined the gray metal bracelet of the tracking module, idly twisted around his wrist. Something, at least, could be done about that. Chapter 18. 14-year-old Jimmy Kirk shivered in the corner of his cabin with the other kids. He had draped them all with the thin blankets from their bunks, tried to make them think it was a dress-up game. But the heat and power had gone off yesterday when the governor's residence had been attacked, so Jimmy knew that whatever was happening out on the wide dirt streets of the colony, it was no game. Near dusk of the second day, when most of the kids were in fitful sleep, the cabin public address speaker had crackled to life, waking everyone. At first, the younger kids were scared, but then the older ones figured out that if the colony's communication systems were back online, maybe that meant the power would be next, and then heat and running water and food. But the cabin stayed dark, and as an unfamiliar voice began to speak. People of Tarsus 4, our colony faces difficult times. Governor Myron could not lead, and so, by the will of the people, I have taken that office in her place. The struggle we must now embark upon is dire, but measures can and will be taken to ensure this colony's survival. I ask all able-bodied adults to assemble at once at the storehouse complex. Ration cards are being prepared and will be allocated according to the group to which each individual is assigned. If you know of any elderly colonists or others too ill or infirm to assemble, inform guards at the storehouses so arrangements can be made for those people as well. Whoever was speaking, the new governor, Jimmy supposed. sounded so reasonable and authoritative that he began to believe that everything would work out. Maybe someone had found another storehouse of grain. It hadn't been spoiled by the fungus. And then a loud noise came over the speaker, like something heavy falling or a door slamming open. Another voice started shouting, "No! No! He's going to kill us! That's..." There was another sound, then a high-pitched hum that Jimmy knew well, laser rifle. The second voice stopped in mid-sentence, followed by another sound of something heavy falling. He heard a new voice call out, asking if the governor was all right. Someone else demanded to know who was responsible for guarding the door. Other voices, far away from the audio pickup, buzzed into incomprehensible growling. Donnie Roy and another 4-year-old huddled closer to Jimmy. All the kids were afraid now. When adults fight, no child feels safe. At last, the measured, reasonable voice of the new governor returned, as if nothing had happened to interrupt him. "Make no mistake," the governor said, "this colony is in the midst of a revolution, and if this colony is to survive, the revolution must succeed. Assemble at the storehouses, go into your groups, obey the guards. That is how we will survive. By my order, Kodos, governor of Tarsus IV." The speaker clicked into silence. The only sound in the dark, cold cabin came from a handful of whimpering children. Then a fist pounded on the outside door. All the children gasped or cried out in surprise, and Jimmy heard the familiar voice of his best friend shout, "Jimmy, it's Matt! The governor wants to see you!" The kids all looked at him through the gloom. "He's got food. All we gotta do is help him out. Come on!" Jimmy went to the wooden door. It creaked on old hinges as he opened it. Outside, lit by the hand torches they carried, exhaling clouds of frozen breath in the cold of growing night, Matthew Call was waiting for him, grinning, accompanied by 5 other teenagers from nearby farms. They all wore red bandanas at their necks. "Tell the other kids to stay in the cabin for now. We'll come back for them after the governors check their records." "Check for what?" Jimmy asked. "It'll be okay," Matt said again. "The governor's got food. All we gotta do is help him." Jimmy looked into his best friend's eyes and saw hunger there. Then he saw that Matt and the other teenagers carried laser rifles, just like the one he'd heard over the speaker. "Why do you have guns?" Matt's grin faded. "I told him you'd be okay. You want to eat, don't you?" He fell back on the same old argument. "All we gotta do is help him." "Help him do what?" "The right thing," Matt answered. Then there was another loud explosion, and Kirk woke with a start, gasping, still feeling the deathly cold wind of Tarsus IV blow into the cabin through the open door. He sat up, remembered he was in his brother's bedroom. Then he heard another loud noise, just like the one that had wakened him. Joe Kirk was in the main room, snoring like artillery fire from the old hollow simulations of the Romulan War. Kirk slowly opened the bedroom door, saw his father on the couch, one arm folded across his eyes, deep asleep, apparently immune to the volume of his exhalations. Kirk seized his opportunity. He walked quietly across the room, found his jacket where he had tossed it, checked the pocket for his communicator, then eased out the door into the hallway. He could hear his father all the way to the lift. By the time he was outside and on the street, Kirk felt awake, and a plan fell into place. The first order of business was the tracking module on his wrist. Something had to be done about it. He pulled out his communicator, called the one person he knew he could always count on, despite what his father said. "This is close enough," Kirk said. "Can you park?" Sam peered through the grimy windshield of the rental land car. The towering, flashing hollow signs of New Union Square lit the street ahead in a rainbow explosion of shifting colors, as if a deep space nebula had been blown apart by a supernova. In the confusion of light, the milling crowds of pedestrians made it hard to tell where the sidewalks ended and the road began. You could hear the rumble of their passing conversations warring with the come-ons from the hollow signs and a dozen competing music broadcasts. There was no possible place to park. Not a chance, he told his brother. I could let you off. Sam had taken Jimmy's call with reluctance. The only thing that was keeping him from doing what Griffin wanted right away was the tracking module Starfleet had clamped on his brother. It was a perfect excuse for his not taking Jimmy to the docks. But with this new plan of his brother's to get rid of it, Sam didn't want to risk anyone from Griffin's organization seeing them together. If Jimmy wasn't wearing the tracking module, then Sam had no excuse. How about it? Sam asked. Kirk had a new plan. Turn right up here. There's an alley by that surplus shop. Sam turned right when the crowd led him, slowly made his way along a narrower, less crowded street. The hollow signs here were fixed within their generator frames, and none of them projected their illusory images down to the street level. He checked the mix of business. Mostly small restaurants, the inexpensive kind, where all food was exuded from a machine in the back. There, Sam's brother said. He pointed to a small storefront where a crooked hollow sign showed the same loop of an antique starship, stretching out as it went into warp drive, disappearing and reappearing on the other side, nacelle lights growing brighter once again. As Kirk had said, there was a narrow opening between that shop and the next building on the street. Turn in. Sam stopped the car in the small blind alley. The headlights illuminated a lurid red sign that carried a warning in several languages and many different alien letter forms. The one Sam could read stated that anyone who parked here would be eaten. You're sure this is okay? He asked. Yeah, come on, Kirk urged. And as quickly as that, he was out of the car. Sam followed his brother to the surplus shop with the infinite starship sign. Wait here, Kirk said, then went in. Sam remained on the sidewalk, looking through the front window to see what appeared to be the aftermath of an explosion of a wrecking yard. Every square centimeter of the shop was covered in rickety-looking shelves holding bins of all sizes and colors, crammed full of memory modules, isobinary chips, quantum isolators. Sam couldn't identify more than a tenth of what he saw. Jimmy, though, looked right at home in the middle of the mess. He had one baffling piece of something in his hand already and was laughing about it with a shopkeeper, a massive, dark-skinned alien with a startlingly white beard, two stubby antennae coming straight out of his forehead, and wearing what looked to be a scarred old plazer's apron. The shopkeeper laughed at whatever it was Jimmy said, then waved his three-fingered hand, or maybe since the light was dim, Sam thought it might even be his tail, and nodded, of course, when Jimmy pointed at the wall behind him, obviously referring to the car. Sam's brother came out of the shop a moment later. No trouble. Junie Ben says we can leave the car there as long as we have to. Let's go. Sam marveled again at how everything seemed to be for Jimmy. Junie Ben? That alien? Yeah, Kirk said as they walked quickly toward the main street. It's his shop. Reaching the street, they pushed their way through a river of shoppers and gawkers until they came to the stream of people walking in the direction Sam realized his brother planned to go. Get this, Sam. Junie Ben's mother was Arcadian, and one of his fathers was a Zikali. Sam wondered if he'd heard correctly. One of his fathers? His brother didn't seem troubled by the concept. That's how Arcadians do it. He gave Sam's shoulder a punch. You're the guy who's going to be a biologist, you tell me. Sam glanced back at the Arcadian's shop with a bemused half smile as for a moment it all came back to him, his fascination with the processes by which chemistry became biology. He could remember reading something years ago about certain species, but Sam shook his head. Those details were lost in a mental fog like so many other things from his childhood. Haven't got a clue, he told his brother. For some reason, the loss bothered him. Kirk nodded, accepting as always. Anyway, the guy's an old boomer engineer. Got his start when his captain mothballed a freighter and let him sell it for parts. Been selling surplus ever since. Sam looked at his brother, whose ingenuity never failed to surprise him. How'd you meet up with someone like that? It's a good shop. I got some of the parts for the override from him. And if I listen to a few of his stories, he gives me a good price, too. Kirk pointed across the street to a small arched gateway. Down there. Traffic was stopped dead, and Sam had no difficulty following his brother as they threaded through the stop-and-go land cars and flyers in wheel mode. The arched gateway led to another alley, though this one was lined on both sides with even smaller shops than Junie Ben's. After a few more minutes, his brother pointed to a door between two fast food extruder stands. Sam couldn't see any sign on it, and its dingy yellow paint was chipped and fading, but Jimmy walked up to it and knocked. Then he motioned for Sam to stand beside him. They have to scan us. Sam was familiar with a lot of places down by the docks that let in patrons only after they'd been scanned. Such places mostly served off-worlders, but that didn't mean there wasn't fun to be had for locals. Jimmy, what kind of place is this? The door clicked open. My kind of place, his brother said, and led Sam in. Sam took a quick look around, winced at the smell of some acrid mixture of old oil, citrus solvent, and burning insulation. The long, narrow room was even more of a mess than Junie Ben's shop, and this time, Sam didn't recognize any of the parts and pieces that were stuffed into every available space, even bins hanging from the ceiling. James T., an excited voice said loudly. It had to be loud to be heard over the unusual music that was playing. At least, James thought it was music. It might also have been a recording of cats yodeling, atonally with no discernible rhythm. Sam watched an oddly thin alien in earth jeans and a fresh white t-shirt step around a stack of what seemed to be empty computer cases. Seemed to be, because some of them had fur growing from their sides and were breathing. Tor, Sam's brother said in recognition. It's not Saturday, the alien burbled. He sounded as if he was perpetually happy. Sam had several of Tor's species in San Francisco before. Humanoid, segmented ridges framing his eyes and his high, lightly ridged forehead. Then the alien's smile turned into something worthy of the Cheshire Cat by stretching remarkably as if to bisect his entire head, and Sam had it. Denobulin. Special project, Kirk announced. He held up his hand to show Tor his tracking module. The Denobulin pursed his lips in admonishment. A Starfleet 1057 Mark B. Very sophisticated. James T., have you been naughty? I'm trying to be, Sam heard his brother say. That's why I need to get this off. Then Sam saw Tor look curiously at him. Is there anything else I should know? It's okay, this is Sam. The Denobulin relaxed. Ah, Kirk the Elder. A pleasure to meet you after all your brother has told me. Yeah, same here, Sam mumbled. He still couldn't get over this new side of his brother he was seeing. Sure, New Union Square was where Jimmy spent most of his weekends, sometimes worked, but who knew how or why, or that he hung out with so many aliens, and aliens liked him. Tor scratched at one of his extravagant, peaked eyebrows, turned his attention back to Kirk. I believe the law requires me to say that any attempt to block the signal of or to remove a certified law enforcement tracking module is a violation of I don't know how many regulations. That's pretty much what Starfleet told me. Right, I've done my civic duty, the Denobulin said happily. What's the plan? Earth's not exactly like Denobula. Tor laughed. Tell me about it. Seriously, doing your civic duty isn't enough to keep you out of trouble if they figure out you helped me. The Denobulin looked hurt. But I've never opened up a 1057 Mark B before. But you know how to take one off, right? Taking it off is easy. Making Starfleet think that you haven't, that's hard. Not this time. Sam watched as his brother held up the module again. It has a subspace link to a second module to let them know if the other guy and I try to meet. The Denobulan brightened and gestured grandly to the back of the shop. Use workshop number 3. I'll bring you my best cutter. Thanks, Tor. An hour should do it. As his brother offered the Denobulan a credit wafer, Sam wished he had his brother's easy confidence. But Tor waved the money aside. No. This is too exciting. Let me look at the pieces. Just don't keep them around too long, Kirk warned. He motioned to Sam. Let's go. Workshop 3 was basically a closet at the end of a creaking hallway, but it had a brightly lit workbench with immaculate tools for just about any kind of delicate translator work. Sam spent most of the first hour watching in awe as his brother deftly assembled what appeared to be a fat cylinder of silver mesh, which he lined with the innards of 4 old communicators connected by glowing optical circuits. A 5th communicator, bulkier than the others, and which Sam recognized as a Starfleet model, was connected to the cylinder by a conductive ribbon. His brother placed that communicator to the side and turned it on. When Kirk finally took a moment to lean back and stretch his arms, Sam had to ask, Jimmy, I knew you were good at this kind of thing, but come on, you've been going to night school or something? Kirk slowly rocked his head back and forth, making his neck crack. All the manuals are in the public computers, especially the old stuff. I don't know. Once you figure out how the basic circuits work, everything else is just a combination of them. Put them all together the right way and it makes sense, you know? Sam laughed. No. He watched Jimmy pick up a Poly exclusion probe, make an adjustment on its dial, then begin moving it near the circuit connections he'd made, all the while monitoring the probe's tiny display of particle positions. Anyway, duotronics I can do. Translators, it's all easy stuff. But quantum bypasses, that kind of thing, I leave that to the experts. I read the manuals, and it's like reading old Orion. Can't figure it out. Sam quietly watched his younger brother's expert movements, deciding not to remind him that, as far as he knew, quantum technology was usually grown under the direct supervision of powerful artificial intelligence programs in factories floating in interstellar space. Nor did he say that he himself had trouble changing power nodes in his communicator. Okay, done, his brother said with pride. Now I can get this off. He stood up from his stool and put his right hand into the open end of the mesh cylinder. Sam, reach in from the other side, hold both sides of the module, and squeeze them together. Sam did as instructed. The cylinder was just wide enough for his hands to fit around Jimmy's wrist. Now what? He asked. His brother flicked on the cutter Tor had brought him. It was a slender, wand-shaped device with a small disc at the working end. As a high-pitched whine began to come from it, the disc suddenly glowed blue, then disappeared. Okay, Kirk said quietly, and Sam could tell he was concentrating. Got it set for metal crystals, self-cooling, full rejection of soft matter. He gave Sam a tight smile. That would be my wrist and your fingers. Then he carefully slipped the cutter into the cylinder and delicately moved the invisible disc toward the top of the module between Sam's hands. Sam was fascinated and had no fear. If anyone knew what he was doing, it was his little brother. He felt a mild vibration in the module, and then, almost anticlimactically, the noise stopped and the disc reappeared, no longer glowing. Pull it apart, his brother said, so Sam did. The gray metal bracelet separated like soft candy. Leave the pieces in the cylinder, and that's that. Sam carefully withdrew his hands from one end as his brother removed his hands and the cutter from the other. Kirk rubbed his right wrist, even though the module had never been tight enough to cause discomfort. Now Sam felt nervous. I gotta tell you, Jimmy, I'm half expecting Starfleet security to beam in any second. Kirk grinned. No way. The mesh and the 4 other communicators in there jam the alarm the module's sending out right now. And that communicator, he pointed to the Starfleet model, has a subspace mode. so I use it to retain the link between the identifier circuits in my module and the ones in the Vulcans, just like Starfleet programmed them to do in the first place. Thank you very much. Right now, the Vulcan tracker is doing the transmitting for both modules and making it look as if the second signal is coming from about 6 kilometers away from the first. Sam was pretty sure he understood the basics of what his brother had done, essentially using Starfleet's own technology against itself. But as much as he respected his brother's talents, Starfleet wasn't exactly stupid about this kind of thing. How long until Starfleet figures out what you've done? His brother was already carefully replacing every tool in its specific slot and holder, making the bench as neat and ordered as when they had entered the workshop. They won't, he laughed. Unless that Spock guy decides to disable his own tracker. But no way Vulcan's going to do anything like that, right? Guess so, Sam said, not really sure. As far as he'd heard, Vulcans were notoriously dull and rule-bound, but you never knew. His brother opened the workshop door and beckoned him. As usual, he was full of energy. Come on, driver, I'm late for a date. Sam, as usual, followed in his brother's wake, trusting the Vulcans were indeed as predictable as Jimmy hoped. They weren't. Chapter 19. In the mid-23rd century, on any aerial approach to San Francisco, the Vulcan compound was unmistakable. The city itself was modern, with narrow, soaring towers and wide-open green parks and colorful mixed-use plazas. A few older buildings of brick and concrete remained, survivors not of the Third World War, which had left most of the city untouched, but of the 3 major earthquakes that cumulatively had done even more damage than the Great San Andreas quake of '42. Geologists were still working hard at adapting Vulcan techniques used to bleed off the mechanical forces of tectonic activity, but for more than a century now, most earthquakes could be reliably predicted to within a 10-hour window with 2 to 3 weeks warning. It had been decades since any earthquake had caused major destruction and disruption, additional evidence of the planet's becoming more and more of a paradise. In the midst of the vast blooms and interlinked pathways of thriving vegetation, and the crisp white, silver, and muted tones of contemporary architecture, the Vulcan diplomatic compound was a distinctive patch of crimson and sand, the colors of home for the 1,500 aliens who lived and worked there. The blinding white United Earth Embassy in Shikar City on Vulcan was no less distinctive in its alien setting. One of the buildings in the compound, though, was noticeably different from the others. Instead of the gently upreaching, softly rounded lines of an ancient aesthetic shaped by the desert winds of Vulcan, it was low, hard-edged, and more reminiscent of an ammunition bunker. For this structure, called with Vulcan efficiency Utility Building 2, the logic of physics had overruled that of tradition. Within the thick protective walls, the compound's independent power generation equipment was housed, along with powerful subspace transmitters in direct contact with the homeworld, and, perhaps most importantly, the compound's own secure transporter hub, which guaranteed that all personnel would be beamed through quintuply redundant Vulcan technology, rather than the comparatively reckless triply redundant systems tolerated by Earthmen. In fact, the Vulcan compound's transporter system was so safe and secure that in more than a century of operation, not one warning alarm had sounded except during training and maintenance drills. Until tonight. When the radiation alarm sounded in the main control room, 2 transporter technicians were on duty. Within half a second, they'd ended their discussion of non-Siracian modes of logic and begun the test procedures required to determine if the alarm had activated because of a fault in the warning subsystem or because of an actual and unprecedented radiation leak. All 5 independent radiation monitor screens displayed on the main console indicated identical levels of high-energy particles leaking from the annular confinement beam generator, indicating, in turn, a serious shielding failure that had cascaded through 5 different protective systems. Neither technician understood how that could be possible, but since they were now being bombarded with enough radiation to have killed a human and to cause themselves troublesome health problems, they swiftly set all controls to a safe mode and walked quickly to the main doors. As trained, they would report to the infirmary for radiation treatment, while the technicians, for the next scheduled shift, would don radiation suits and commence repairs. Within 30 seconds of the alarm, the main transporter control room was empty and unguarded. 30 seconds after that, Spock walked in. He headed to the main console and inserted a black data card. 3 new programs began running in the transporter computers. The first replayed and then altered the security imaging file to show that after the technicians left the chamber, no one else had entered. The second erased the fractal program that had reproduced the effects of a radiation leak in the 5 different monitoring systems. The third program entered 2 sets of transport coordinates into the controls and began a 15-second countdown. Spock crossed unhurriedly to the transporter platform and stepped onto the rightmost lens. Then he waited, hands behind his back. A few seconds later, he dissolved into a glittering matter stream and faded from sight, except for his tracking module. It landed on the platform when the elementary particles comprising Spock's right wrist lost cohesion. A moment later, the matter stream reformed on the leftmost lens, and Spock reappeared. When movement was possible again, he walked over to retrieve the fallen module and put it into the pocket of his cloak. He returned to the console, removed the black data card, and inserted a blue one. The program it contained erased the transporter log. Spock pocketed both cards, then left. It had taken him all of 90 seconds to defeat the Starfleet module, and though he knew it was wrong, he felt proud of himself. How anyone could mistake him for a human, he just didn't know. On space dock, the 9 representatives seated around the table in the narrow, windowless conference room were silent. The images on the view screen and the charts showing the spread of the atrocities were that disturbing, that alarming. The sole reason Mallory's misleadingly named Department of General Services existed was to deal with those things the regular Starfleet did not have to contend with in its mission of exploration. The fact that his department was not included on most organizational charts, its presence and actions nothing more than a line or 2 in the yearly allocation reports, did not concern him, because the universe was not yet as perfect as the leaders of the Federation and of Starfleet wished to see it and tried to make it. It was his responsibility to confront those imperfections. So, at this meeting, it was his responsibility to ask the one obvious and unanswered question. Could it be Kodos? In the subdued light of the hushed room, 8 grave-faced individuals turned from the view screen and its dreadful images of children mutilated by Starfleet weapons. Facing Mallory were 2 Starfleet admirals, 4 civilian analysts, and 2 elected representatives of the Federation Council, here to provide oversight. Both admirals were regional commanders of the specialized security forces in charge of colonial defense, whose usual most pressing concern was tracking Orion pirates. The civilian analysts were from Starfleet Command, representing expertise in colonial affairs, the history of the Hellstrom Nebula development region, interstellar treaty law, and deviant psychology. The final 2 members of the committee were elected representatives from the Federation Council, a human from New Montana and Terev of Vulcan. The senior admiral, Elias Mather, was the first to respond to the possibility Mallory had raised. You mean, is this warlord they call the General and Kodos the Executioner one and the same? It's something we must consider, Mallory said. Both men are brutal, both appear to be driven by some strange concept of eugenics, and both use children as their fighting forces. Governor Kodos used children? The representative from New Montana was Mur Proctor, a novice, newly appointed to the innocuously named DGS Steering Committee. The reports of the time are unequivocal, Tarev explained. He had been a member of this committee for more than 10 years, and Vulcans had led the first relief mission to Tarsus 4. In some cases, he continued, entire families were destroyed. That is what one would expect if Kodos followed a strict interpretation of eugenics. By killing every member of a family, he would have successfully eliminated undesirable genetic traits from the population pool. However, Tarev added without emotion, the eyewitnesses also report that some of the young were not terminated, even though their parents were. That is not the action of someone following a program of eugenics. That could be construed as an act of recruitment. But why children? This time the question was asked by the civilian specialist from Starfleet's legal division, Chinatsu Rin, severe in appearance, with stark black hair framing the pale features of one who had grown up in the armored pressure domes of Venus. Several explanations are possible, Tarev said. His neutral tone and bland expression gave no indication that he was discussing the brutalization of children. In terms of the specific conditions on Tarsus 4, Governor Kodos clearly viewed himself as a savior. While his actions were unconscionable, his goal was logical. He wished to save as many colonists as possible. Children require less sustenance than adults. Therefore, for every adult he executed, 2 children could receive enough food to survive. It was an equation born in madness, but an equation nonetheless. Unlike many at the table, Admiral Mather was well versed in the darker realities of interstellar exploration. He folded his hands before him. What are the other explanations? Tarev's explanation was chillingly pragmatic. For a leader seeking an army willing to do his bidding without question, children's minds are most malleable. Their thoughts are not complex. They have little sense of their own mortality. They can be coerced by rudimentary expressions of punishment and reward. Perhaps, most importantly, their moral and ethical notions of life are not fully formed, and thus can be shaped by a charismatic leader. The civilian psychologist Tyler Light nodded in agreement, one hand absently stroking his gray beard. All eyewitness accounts confirm that Governor Kodos was extremely compelling. It seems some of those chosen for execution submitted willingly after listening to his rationale. Though I would argue that this new warlord is insane, Wren added. His actions do seem deliberate. His strategy, the legal specialist gestured to Tarev, well thought out, it appears. But he's using children to fight his battles. Darskin Sauter was the second admiral, and he had just been promoted to command rank because of his heroic actions in defusing the Trimega insurrection without firing a shot. Precisely the cool-headed, nonviolent approach Starfleet sought out and rewarded in its officers. Yet Mallory had seen the young man's face blanch as the images of the recent casualties had appeared on the screen. How is that well thought out? Admiral Sauter looked stricken, as if he personally were responsible for what had happened. We all saw the report from Hellstrom 3. Our security forces slaughtered those innocents. Mather regarded his young fellow officer with compassion. A case of brilliant, albeit regrettable tactics. As soon as our senior officer on the ground believed his forces had mistakenly engaged non-combatants, he quite correctly broke off the attack and withdrew so he could ask for new orders. During that withdrawal, the Warlord's second team was able to reach Hellstrom 3's undefended power generator and set the charges. Sauter's voice rose with anger. So this criminal just sacrificed those children, knowing what would happen to them? And nearly succeeded in erasing Hellstrom 3's colony, which appears to have been his objective. Keep in mind that at least 4 other colonies have been destroyed or suffered forced evacuation over the past 2 years. Ahmed Najuri, a small, quiet scholar unheard until now, held up a hand to draw the other's attention. Governor Kodos tried to save Tarsus 4. Do we have any evidence that these new attacks are due to him as well? I've simply raised the possibility, Mr. Najuri, Mallory said. We'd be in a better position if we knew this so-called general's long-term objective. Is there anything of any strategic value among the worlds of the Hellstrom Nebula? The civilian historian shook his head. 23 primary star systems, no indigenous intelligent species, 9 Class M worlds and 2 Class M moons suitable for colonization, 6 other worlds suitable for terraforming, 30 gas giants for raw material. Those can be found in almost any system. He paused, then summed up. They're just planets, nothing special. Mallory turned to the legal specialist. Ms. Wren, are any of the Hellstrom worlds part of a territorial dispute? She shook her head as well. With no spacefaring species within 50 light-years, they're covered by the Babel Expansion Treaty of 2212, jointly administered by the 6 Federation worlds closest to the nebula. No disputes, settled laws. Mallory looked around the table at the other 8 attendees. So, if it is Kodos who's behind these attacks, there's nothing we can point to and say this is what he believes he's protecting? Mallory's communicator beeped. He checked the display code. It was his assistant, overriding his privacy lockout. He looked up, disregarding Sally's summons. This meeting was too important to interrupt and reconvene, but no one chose to respond to his questions, so Mallory took the lead again. The Federation will not abandon the remaining colonies in the nebula to a warlord, he said firmly. Clearly, we need a next step. Several steps, Admiral Mather said. Mallory ignored a second beep from his communicator. What do you need from us, Admiral? Mather thought a moment. The highest priority is to work out some way to predict what the General's next target will be. We have a lot of firepower in the sector. I can assign more ships over the short term. But first, we do have to find out what it is he wants. Then, maybe, we can anticipate his moves. All right, Mallory said. My department will set up a study group at once. What else? New rules of engagement. What do I tell my people when they're attacked by children? Mallory had anticipated this question and had made his decision. This was the time to take the wraps off a secret project. This is strictly need to know, not to be repeated outside this committee. All eyes were on him now. Starfleet Technical is actively redeveloping personal phase weapon technology. Tyler Light snorted. And will we be bringing back blunderbusses and flintlocks too? Mallory understood the psychologist's skepticism. Personal phase weapons dated back to before the founding of the Federation and had been on their way to becoming standard-issue sidearms throughout Starfleet, praised for their ability to safely stun combatants. Then had come the Romulan War. And though no Romulans had ever been engaged in face-to-face combat, too many humans had fallen before the onslaught of the Romulans' laser-armed robotic forces. By the end of humanity's first, and it was hoped, last full-scale interstellar war, phase weapons had been replaced by much more powerful Class 8 laser weapons, which added stimulated subspace energy frequencies to those of traditional laser light. The result had been a powerful new type of combat weapon with a far more efficient use of energy, and capable of blast and penetrative effects that the designers of the antique Class 1 lasers could never have envisioned. The one drawback, though, was that it was notoriously difficult to employ a Class 8 laser as a non-lethal weapon. Too far away from the enemy, and the laser would only prove annoying. Too close, and the laser could stun the target permanently, eliminating even the possibility of regaining consciousness. Thus, Starfleet had gone back to basics, and for years had been attempting to marry the blast effects of the standard-issue Class 8 laser with the humane stun settings of the old phase weapon technology. According to the latest evaluation reports Mallory had read, it appeared Starfleet had finally come close to solving the technical issues and was ready to deploy, on a test basis only, a new weapon dubbed the Phaser, which combined the best of both earlier systems. Mallory now declassified this for the committee and promised Admiral Mather that his forces in the Hellstrom Nebula would be the first to receive the new phasers. Any engagement with the General's child army would be conducted with stun weapons and not deadly force. "Do you know when these weapons will be available?" Admiral Mather asked. "No. What do I tell my people in the meantime?" Mallory had no prepared response ready. "They'll have to use their best judgment." "And fire on children?" the senior admiral challenged. But Mallory had seen even more of the universe's darkest corners than Mather. "Admiral, it is Starfleet's duty to protect the lives and well-being of all Federation colonists. If the General's forces attack another colony, and Starfleet security forces are called upon to defend that colony, your people will be firing on the enemy. I'm sorry, but I can't put it any plainer than that." The Admiral stood, his posture rigid. Mallory chose to go along with the moment and end the meeting. He got to his feet as well. "Just be damn quick with that study group," Mather growled as he exited the room. "We need to know what this fanatic's thinking." As the rest of the committee members left, Mallory finally flipped open his communicator. "This had better be good," Mallory warned his assistant. "Special Agent in Charge Louis Hammer needs to talk with you." Mallory automatically assessed his assistant's voice, found no evidence of worry, and switched his attention from the tragedy on Hellstrom 3 to yesterday's excitement at headquarters. He checked the time display on the view screen. "That took the boys longer than I thought. Say again?" "Never mind, Sally," Mallory said. "I'll take the call in my office." Chapter 20. 2 minutes later, the image of the angry SCIS agent appeared on the desk screen in Mallory's office. "I told you were making a mistake, Mr. Mallory." Hamer was thoroughly annoyed and not bothering to hide it. Mallory suppressed a smile, understanding that the agent's emphasis was to underscore his displeasure at being forced to take orders from a civilian bureaucrat who headed one of Starfleet's lesser-known and least useful departments. "One of the boys removed his tracking module, did he? You expected this? Whoever built that override wouldn't have any trouble defeating a standard tracker. As a matter of fact, I was expecting you to call a few hours earlier than this." Mallory made a mental note to write a glowing letter of commendation to soften any lingering resentment the agent might develop for having been kept in the dark. "So which one was it?" "Which one?" Hamer repeated as if confused. "We needed to know which one of the two kids built that device. So, putting them in the modules was the test. Whoever got out of his is our resident genius." What Mallory didn't understand was why the SCIS agent suddenly looked pleased. "So, they both removed the modules at exactly the same time, about 25 minutes ago." There weren't many times Mallory was surprised in his line of work, but this was one of them. "They're better than I thought," he said softly, not caring if the agent heard him. "They really are working together." Hamer had the decency not to gloat excessively, but Mallory didn't begrudge him the moment. "Shall I send out a fugitive alert to the protectors and travel hubs?" the agent asked. "Not at this time, thank you. With any luck. Now that the boys are out of the trackers, they'll lead us to whoever it is they're working with." Hamer's mood darkened. "Except, without the trackers, how can they lead you anywhere?" "Oh, we have our resources," Mallory said, and unlike Hamer, he didn't gloat. At 0200 local time, another of Spock's fractal programs became active. Operating in a highly distributed pattern that was too diffuse to trigger a security alert in the Vulcan compound's computer network, the program diverted the feed from the imagers in the main reception hall and then processed it to remove Spock and his activities before resending it to the databanks. Free from surveillance, Spock approached a display cabinet along the back wall. It was from a pre-Enlightenment museum on Vulcan, long buried under once radioactive rubble, now meticulously restored and decontaminated. Because it predated Surak's teachings, the cabinet was intricately carved with complex ornamentation of intertwined beasts and leaves brought into high relief by careful shading with a blue vegetable dye, unique to the era in which the piece was built. Earthmen invariably declared that the ancient relic was breathtakingly beautiful. The Vulcans who were posted here were pleased to provide an aesthetic experience to their hosts. Those same Vulcans, though, preferred the simpler lines of the cases that flanked the cabinet. Those pieces were constructed much later in Vulcan's history, and the subtle abstract designs carved into their woodwork tactily expressed an equation for deriving prime numbers. That meant they were pleasing to look at and educational, a far more logical style of design. Spock, however, found the older cabinet more interesting, not that he'd ever admitted his preference. But this night, his interest in it was not because of its beauty. Inside, protected behind doors of rose-tinted glass made from the sands of the Silron Desert in Vulcan's southern hemisphere, there rested the embassy's collection of primitive clay figurines produced by the planet's earliest known culture. One of the figurines in the display was the original, from which Spock had fabricated the forgery he had sold to Dala. 12 others completed the collection. From his other late-night visits to the reception hall, Spock had determined that 5 of the 13 were, in fact, forgeries, replacing originals that had been stolen and sold by the real theft ring operating from the Vulcan compound, a criminal enterprise that Sarek had now admitted the staff knew about, yet would not interfere with. Spock had deconstructed the logic of his father's position over and over and had been able to come to one conclusion. Whoever was responsible for the thefts was known to the staff, and the staff had deliberately chosen to ignore the crime. Only 2 possibilities existed to justify that decision. The first was that the person responsible was a high-ranking Vulcan official, and disclosure would disrupt that official's dealings with the United Earth government, the Federation Council, or some other equally important body. The second was that the person responsible was a prominent member of the embassy's local staff, a human. In that case, disclosure of the crime would prompt a disruption in Vulcan-Earth relations. With the fervor of youth, Spock viewed both ethically flawed positions as typical of so-called pragmatic adults, and an affront to all that the Vulcan culture stood for. Some of the staff who worked in the compound had been on Earth for more than 20 years, so Spock understood how their ethical standards might have been eroded in that time. After all, in the more than 20 years his mother had spent among Vulcans, she readily described how she had changed, willingly embracing the benefits of the Vulcan way. No doubt the Vulcans posted to duty on this world had reacted in a similar, though less positive fashion, and embraced the slippery ethics of the non-logical. Spock had done the right thing, he knew. First, by noticing that figurines were being stolen and replaced, and then by reporting what he had learned to Sarek. That his father's logic had also been made uncertain by his exposure to humans was regrettable, but not surprising. Sometimes Spock wondered how Vulcan culture could survive in the hands of the older generation, who often seemed to have lost touch with the pure message of Surak. In any event, whatever the future might hold for his world, Spock did not consider himself obliged to follow it into ethical decline. He had tried to work within the rules, but if those in authority here refused to abide by the same conditions, then he had no logical choice but to proceed on his own, to gather insurmountable evidence that he could present to authorities on Vulcan. If that meant prominent Vulcans or human staff would be called upon to account for their transgressions, and so be it. The teachings of Surak were clear to every Vulcan who cared to study them, and Spock was Vulcan. He would permit no equivocation, human or Vulcan, to deter him. Logically, he could do no less than what he did now. He used a small scanner he had borrowed from the Scholars' Library that the compound maintained for Earthmen. The palm-sized device was specially calibrated for archaeological use. He aimed it at the figurines behind glass. Each one registered with an authentic spectrographic and isotope dating profile. Then he inserted a poly key into the antique cabinet's security latch, a feature not found on the cabinet as originally built, but considered necessary on a planet that still had occasional crime. No offense intended to the Vulcan's human hosts. The key vibrated, its nanoscale filaments filling the mechanical space reserved for a standard key, then transmitted an encoded magnetic pulse that he had already decrypted from the databanks. The cabinet doors clicked open. Without the barrier of the rose-tinted glass between him and the figurines, Spock scanned them again. 6 registered as forgeries now. The scheme was clever, Spock admitted. Somewhere in the frame of the door, there was a series of sophisticated transmitters that responded to the pulses from any type of scanner or sensor. That triggered each device to return a fabricated sensor signature for the figurine it was paired with, containing all the details necessary to confirm the figurine as an original. Spock had deconstructed the transmitters and had built one of his own, which he had placed in the forgery he sold to Dala. The human female sensor had been tricked by the false signal, and she had accepted it without realizing the deception and without suspecting that she had taken into her possession an inert lump of fired clay, not much more than 10 days old. But that detail was for the next stage of his operation. For now, Spock was eager to try his newest discovery, an algorithm that would allow him to read the security log on the cabinet and see who had last opened it. Whoever was stealing the figurines clearly was able to manipulate the security imagers in the compound as easily as he could. He had watched the recordings after each theft, and there was never the slightest indication that anyone had altered the reception hall, opened the cabinet, and replaced a figurine. But the security register installed in the cabinet was separate from the main network. Every time a key was inserted into the lock, the register noted the biosignature of the person holding the key. Spock now used a small personal bicorder to transmit his algorithm to the security device that monitored the lock. Vulcan coding scrolled rapidly across the bicorder screen as the register was decrypted. With inner calm befitting a Vulcan, he waited patiently for his mathematical innovation to complete its work. In just a few seconds, he would have the name of the person responsible for the thefts, and he faced that moment properly this time without the emotion of pride. The screen flashed, the algorithm completed its work. Spock read the name of the thief. Numb not from self-control, but from shock. The thief was his father.